So I'm very hopeful going into 2023 that it's going to be a very big year for gaming, and there are a couple of games I can point to right now that have been lined up for the next 12 months. But one in particular that I keep coming back to, and I wanted to get a bit of a temperature check here for, is Final Fantasy XVI. With the most recent trailer, we found out it's coming out June 22nd, 2023, so we're about 6 months out from this game releasing, and I want to talk a little bit about it here today and why this has me excited for a mainline Final Fantasy game, and that's not something I've been able to say in actually quite a while. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button, and if you're new to the Small Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first off, with that most recent trailer, we did find out several things. The biggest one, though, is it will be a mature rated Final Fantasy game. We kind of figured that based on some of the things that were in trailers months ago, like the amount of blood and some of the violence that, while it was cut away from, it was still more apparent than we've seen in previous Final Fantasy games. So that alone, considering we've had Final Fantasy Type 0 and Final Fantasy Strangers of Paradise, those are the only other two mature rated Final Fantasy games. This will be the first numbered mainline Final Fantasy game that's ever been mature rated. And then you bring in the talent like Yoshida, and him bringing in a whole team of developers and designers to sort of craft and mold this game around what's obviously a massive budget that Square is putting into this thing. I think this is setting up to be an incredible experience for Final Fantasy. And I was trying to think back to the last time that I genuinely looked at a numbered Final Fantasy game and said, okay, that was a good quality outing for the series. And I feel like I have to go back to Final Fantasy XII, and that was on the PS2. And before that, 10. I like 10, I feel like, more than 12, and some people, they go back and forth on this. 12 was very good, but 10 was the last one we had where I felt like that really nailed it when it comes to the traditional turn-based JRPG game. Since then, they've been working to get away from that. 12, you would basically program your allies, and you go into a battle and just kind of watch it happen, especially towards the end game when you had it all figured out. 13, you only controlled one character, like Lightning, for example, and everyone else had roles. Final Fantasy 14 and 11 were MMORPGs, so I didn't really get into them because with an MMO, you definitely have to realize this is a game I'm going to be playing specifically for a while, and I won't necessarily have time for other games outside of this. So basically, it's a time commitment that I'm not necessarily prepared to make for an MMORPG like that. That said, I understand Final Fantasy 14 is very, very good. People like the title, so it's good to see that is a mainline Final Fantasy game that comes with very little controversy, I guess. Well, except for when it launched, but now it's in a great place. And then we had Final Fantasy 15. Didn't like Final Fantasy 15. Actually, I think I like Final Fantasy 13 more than 15. If I really had to be honest, I like 13 maybe a little more than other people did. 15, I don't know if it was the characters, the story, the setting. It didn't work for me, I feel like. And the combat itself is the furthest they've gotten away from the traditional menu-based system and really worked towards that action RPG, which is a big piece of controversy for Final Fantasy XVI, as they did bring in a combat designer who's well known for Devil May Cry to work on it, and it's pretty obvious this is almost Devil May Cry Final Fantasy, as it is heavily action-based. One of the reasons for that, as Yoshida mentioned in an interview, is they sort of polled the Final Fantasy community, which I assume is on their website or on forums or something, and they found that it's actually more split than you'd expect. The traditional menu-based JRPG setup for Final Fantasy that we've known for quite a while, right? Going back, like I said, to Final Fantasy X and before that, it's kind of like 50-50. There are many people who prefer the action RPG setup that we've especially seen with, I guess, like the Tales games, and you control one character and the other characters have roles and all these things, and maybe it's just the nature of, I feel like I have more control over my character, especially in movement and dodging, and that's something I can understand. However, Yoshida made a pretty good point that with what they're trying to create here with Final Fantasy XVI, where it's obvious, heavily cinematic game with, again, a lot of money being poured into it to give it that appearance, going through the world, the cutscenes, the setup, and then everything stops. And your character is looking at the enemies on the other side of this invisible line, and everyone just kind of hangs out while you pick through a pretty large menu system. Kind of breaks the immersion a bit, whereas if they are able to quickly transition from a set-piece story into the battle and then out of that with little to no loading, which it's going to be on the PS5 specifically, so I assume that's something that they won't need to deal with, where you have 10 or 15-second load times before and after battles. It just kind of flows together a bit nicer, and based on how, realistic a lot of these visuals are looking, it won't be hard to believe in terms of the battle system. Whereas you're getting to a point where, okay, especially with the newer generation coming in of gamers, they're like, I don't understand. Why is everyone just standing around waiting for me to pick menus? That said, if this was a traditional turn-based JRPG, I would still be all for it either way. So I don't mind if it's action-based. I don't mind if it's the typical turn-based JRPG. I'm good for either one here. It'll also have New Game Plus, which is good because I am noticing that many New Game Pluses are being added in through DLC or roadmaps months or even a year after release. So I'm hoping this is something that's just there immediately, as there were previous games where you would, in Final Fantasy, would go through with New Game Plus. And it was pretty fun to just go through with your statistics and equipment and just wipe everything out. And at times, like Final Fantasy X-2, it was really the way you would work to get the true 100% ending. I also like the idea of these icons. From what I can tell, they're summons that we've had in other games. Like in the trailer, they showed Shiva, Ifrit was in there, Bahamut. I saw the Phoenix. And there's a lot of speculation now if they could have some hidden icons, maybe towards the end of the game. And that's something I'm hopeful for, especially if you bring in some ridiculous icon like Leviathan, something there, or you could bring in Knights of the Round. I'm curious where they pull some of these summons from throughout the history of Final Fantasy, but you will apparently attain icons, their abilities, and different things as you play through the game as the sole protagonist that you control and it focuses on. That being Clive, you're going to be controlling him throughout. You'll be building up his skills and abilities and stats. And you will have other characters that, of course, come in and out of the story to progress it further, but we won't have that traditional party system where you control all of the different characters, or I guess even have roles for them. It seems to be focusing on, I guess, Clive and these different icons. The setting looks pretty good, too. It's what you'd expect from Final Fantasy, although I guess they kind of got away from that a bit as well over the past couple of iterations. This looking like it's leaning more into a Game of Thrones kind of setup, that medieval setting, but also with a lot of fantastical elements, like, again, the icons and the magic and all these different things. But they do have warring nations, and it seems like there's going to be a lot of story that leans into political elements between them, a lot of twists, turns, and I'm sure quite a bit of backstabbing. So I'm very excited for Final Fantasy XVI, but I am curious what everyone out there is thinking right now. From what I can see online, people seem really excited based on the different trailers we've had released, some of the information that's got out there, and yes, kind of the developers and lineage behind this with Yoshida, who, has been on a roll with something like Final Fantasy XIV, so it's exciting to see what he can accomplish with the big mainline single player experience with seemingly all the money behind him from Square and yes, also Sony. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.